I was folding towels when my husband told me I had to leave. Not tomorrow. Not after we talked. Not after 28 years of marriage, shared holidays, buried parents, and a mortgage paid down inch by inch. That night, he stood in the doorway of our bedroom like a man rehearsing a line he'd already practiced in his head. Calm, controlled, almost polite. "She's coming tonight," he said, "with the child." I remember the sound the towels made when they slipped from my hands and hit the floor. Soft, insignificant, like everything I had become to him. My husband was 65 years old. His hair had gone thin at the crown. His knees ached in the mornings. I used to remind him to take his blood pressure pills. I used to cut his meat when his arthritis flared. I used to be the one who knew where everything was kept. And now he was standing there telling me that a woman half my age was moving into the house I had turned into a home. "She's 32, he added, as if that made it sound better. "And the boy needs stability." The boy. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, the explanation, the apology that never came. "You're asking me to leave," I said. He exhaled slowly, like I was being unreasonable. "It's temporary. We'll figure things out later." Later. That word men use when they want something to go away quietly. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. He shrugged, actually shrugged. "You'll manage. You always do." I felt something tear inside me then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean, irreversible rip. I had been managing my entire life. Managing his moods, managing his career, managing our family holidays so his sister wouldn't feel slighted. Managing silence when he forgot my birthday. Managing loneliness in a marriage that slowly turned into a routine. And now I was being managed out of my own life. "She'll be here in an hour," he said. "I thought it would be easier if you weren't." That was when I understood. He didn't just want me gone. He wanted me erased. I packed one suitcase. Not because I had little to take, but because I couldn't bear to touch the rest. Every drawer felt like a lie. Every photograph on the wall suddenly belonged to someone else. As I walked toward the front door, I heard a car pull into the driveway. A woman's laugh drifted through the open window. Light, carefree, young. I did not turn around. I stepped into the night with no coat, no plan, and a marriage that had just been replaced by something newer, younger, and cruelly convenient. But as I stood there on the sidewalk watching the porch light flick on for someone else, I made myself one promise. If my husband thought throwing me away would make his life simpler, he had no idea what he had just started. Because women like me don't disappear quietly. We remember. And we prepare. I spent that first night in my car, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because every place I could think of felt like admitting defeat. A friend's couch would turn into questions. A hotel would turn into silence. My sister would turn it into a family meeting by morning. So I drove. The streets were empty in that way. They only are after midnight when traffic lights change for no one, and storefronts reflect your own face back at you like a witness. I parked near the river, leaned my seat back, and stared at the ceiling of the car until my eyes burned. I kept hearing his voice. "You'll manage, you always do." I remembered the first time he said something like that. Years ago, when his company transferred him across the state with 2 weeks' notice. I managed the move. When his mother moved in after her stroke, I managed her care. When his brother borrowed money and never paid it back, I managed the budget. Managing had become my personality. Around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A text from him. "I left some cash on the counter. We'll talk soon." I laughed out loud, a sharp, ugly sound that startled me. Cash. Like I was a teenager sneaking out like a favor. I did not respond. By sunrise, I drove to a small motel off the highway. Nothing charming, just clean sheets and a clerk who didn't look twice at a woman my age, checking in alone with swollen eyes. I slept for 2 hours, woke with a headache, and sat on the edge of the bed trying to remember when my life had become something that could be dismantled in a single evening. That was when the anger arrived. Not the screaming kind, the quiet organizing kind. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Our accounts were joint. Or so I had always believed. What I saw made my stomach tighten. Large transfers, not recent. Months old, carefully spaced, quietly moved into an account with only his name on it. He had been preparing. That realization hurt more than the girl, more than the child, more than being told to leave. He hadn't acted impulsively. He had planned to remove me. I called my lawyer before 9 in the morning, a woman I met years earlier when we updated our will. She answered on the second ring. "I need an emergency consultation," I said. My voice sounded steady. It surprised me. "What's happened?" she asked. "My husband threw me out last night," I replied, "and I think he's been hiding assets." There was a pause. "Come in today." By noon, I was sitting in her office, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee, telling the story from the beginning. She didn't interrupt. She took notes. When I finished, she leaned back and looked at me carefully. "How old is the child?" she asked. "I don't know exactly," I said. "Young, preschool maybe." "And he claims it's his." "Yes." She nodded slowly. "This isn't just an affair, this is leverage." "What do you mean?" "He brought them into the house you share," she said. "That's not about love. That's about forcing you out without a fight." The word fight settled into me. "I don't want revenge," I said automatically. She raised an eyebrow. "You want fairness." I thought about the towels on the floor, the shrug, the laugh in my driveway. "No," I said quietly, "I want accountability." She smiled just slightly. "Then you came to the right place." As I left her office, something shifted inside me. I was still hurt, still displaced, still angry, but I was no longer lost. Because while my husband believed youth had replaced me, he had forgotten something important. I had built the life he was standing on, and now I was going to take a very close look at the foundation. I did not go back to the house. That mattered more than I expected. The lawyer told me I had every right to return to demand access to call the police if necessary. But something in me resisted the image of standing on my own porch while a younger woman watched from behind the curtains, a child clinging to her leg. I refused to be reduced to that scene. Instead, I checked into a furnished apartment across town. Neutral walls, no memories. A place that smelled like cleaning products instead of history. The lease was month to month, temporary but solid. I needed solid. That afternoon, my lawyer sent me the preliminary financial disclosure request. Reading it felt like opening a locked drawer in my own mind. Numbers I had trusted, accounts I thought were shared, decisions I thought were mutual. They weren't. My husband had been siphoning money into a private account for more than a year. Not reckless amounts, strategic ones. Enough to build a cushion, enough to fund a new life, enough to make sure I would struggle if I walked away quietly. I sat on the couch, papers spread around me, and realized something sharp and humiliating. I had been loyal, and loyalty had made me blind. The next call came from his sister. She didn't ask how I was. She asked what I planned to do. "He says you left," she said. I closed my eyes. "He told you that?" "Well," she replied, hesitating. "He said you needed space." Needed space. "He brought another woman and a child into our home," I said. "I was told to leave." There was a pause, then a sigh. You know how men are at that age. They panic. I felt my jaw tighten. This wasn't panic, this was preparation. She lowered her voice. "You don't want to make this ugly." I thought of the money moved quietly. The locks he'd changed, the text offering cash like hush money. "It's already ugly," I said. "You're just used to me cleaning it up." I hung up before she could respond. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds. A neighbor's television, a dog barking somewhere. The hum of an air conditioner I didn't know how to turn off. At 2 a.m, I remembered something small, something I had almost forgotten. Years ago, my husband had insisted I sign a stack of documents when he refinanced the house. I remembered the way he rushed me, the way he said it was routine, the way I trusted him because trust had become habit. I opened my laptop and searched for the digital copies my lawyer had requested. It took an hour, but I found them. And there it was. My name was not on the deed anymore. I stared at the screen, my heart beat loud in my ears. He had removed me. Not recently, months ago. Which meant when he told me to leave, he wasn't bluffing. He believed I had no claim. I emailed my lawyer immediately. She called within minutes. "That changes things," she said. "He didn't just betray you emotionally. He attempted to erase your legal standing." "Can he do that?" I asked. "Not legally," she replied, "but he can try." I laughed softly. "He always tries." She paused. "There's something else." "What?" "If he altered the deed without your informed consent, that's fraud." The word landed heavy. Fraud. For the first time since that night, I smiled. Not because I was happy, because the story he thought he controlled had just cracked open. The next morning, I drove past my old house. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. But I saw her car in the driveway. I saw the curtains drawn. And I felt nothing. Not jealousy, not grief. Just clarity. He had replaced the role I played, but he had underestimated the woman who filled it. And that was going to cost him far more than he imagined. The first official letter arrived on a Thursday morning. Thick envelope. Neutral font. My lawyer's return address printed cleanly in the corner. I held it for a long moment before opening it, feeling the strange weight of paper that now carried more truth than my marriage ever had. Notice of financial disclosure demand. Temporary restraining order request regarding marital assets. Petition for exclusive use of shared funds pending investigation. I read it twice. This was no longer emotional. It was procedural. And that terrified him more than tears ever could. By noon, my phone started ringing. I let it go to voicemail. By evening, the messages piled up. His voice moved through predictable stages: confusion, offense, anger, and finally something that sounded like fear. "You blindsided me," he said in one message. "This didn't have to be legal." I replayed that line several times. Didn't have to be legal. As if legality were an inconvenience. As if fairness were optional. I deleted the message without replying. The next morning, I met my lawyer again. She had brought a second attorney with her, someone who specialized in property disputes involving elder manipulation and asset concealment. "That younger woman," he said carefully. "Do you know if she's aware of the financial structure?" "I doubt it," I replied. "She thinks she won." They exchanged a glance. "She may not realize she's standing on ground that isn't stable," my lawyer said. "If he promised her security based on assets he doesn't fully control, she's collateral." The word settled in me slowly. Collateral. I thought of the child. Not with anger, with sadness. Children don't choose the messes adults make, but I would not sacrifice myself to clean this one. That afternoon, my lawyer received confirmation from the county clerk. The deed modification my husband had filed was incomplete, one signature missing. Mine, which meant legally the house was still marital property, which meant his grand gesture of replacing me had been built on an assumption that I wouldn't notice. That night, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. It was her. I recognized the tone instantly. Defensive, rehearsed, trying to sound gracious. "I didn't know how else to reach you," she wrote. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. He told me you left because you wanted freedom." I stared at the screen, surprised by the calm that washed over me. "Freedom," I typed back slowly. "He told you that because it makes you easier to manage." There was a long pause before the response. "I didn't mean to hurt you." That was when I knew. She didn't understand what she had walked into. I replied once more. "You didn't hurt me. You exposed him." Then I blocked the number. 2 days later, my lawyer called with news that made me sit down. My husband had attempted to withdraw a significant sum from the joint investment account. It was denied. The restraining order had frozen it. "He's panicking," she said, "which means he's about to make mistakes." The following week, a court date was set. Temporary orders, asset review, occupancy discussion. He would have to sit across from me. He would have to explain himself. For years, I had swallowed explanations. Accepted half answers, filled in gaps with patience. Not anymore. As the date approached, I found myself standing taller, sleeping better, eating regularly again. Pain was still there, but it was no longer steering. What surprised me most was not the anger. It was the sense of recognition. I was meeting myself again. The woman who kept records, who noticed patterns, who didn't confuse kindness with weakness. My husband thought replacing me would simplify his life. Instead, he had awakened someone who no longer needed his permission to exist. And the court was about to hear exactly who had been erased, and who had done the erasing. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Not intimate, just efficient. Pale walls, wood benches worn smooth by decades of shifting bodies and silent waiting. I arrived early, as I always had for things that mattered. My lawyer sat beside me, flipping through a folder she knew by heart. My husband arrived late. That was deliberate. He wanted to make an entrance. He walked in with her at his side, hand resting lightly on her back like a claim. She wore a pale dress that tried too hard to look modest. The child clung to her leg, wide-eyed and confused. I did not look away. For a brief moment, his eyes met mine. I expected defiance. What I saw instead was calculation. He was already adjusting his story. The judge was a man in his late 50s, calm, observant. He asked routine questions first: names, length of marriage, employment history. He let my husband speak. My husband described a marriage that had run its course. He said we had grown apart. He said I wanted independence. He said I chose to leave. He did not mention the locks changed. The accounts moved. The deed altered. When it was my turn, my lawyer did not rush me. She asked me one question. "Did you leave voluntarily?" "No," I said. "I was told to leave so another woman and a child could move in." The judge looked up. My lawyer then submitted the financial documents, the attempted transfers, the incomplete deed change, the timeline. Each page landed with a quiet sound that felt louder than any argument. My husband's attorney shifted in his seat. The judge asked my husband directly why he attempted to remove my name from the deed without disclosure. He cleared his throat. I thought it had already been handled. "By whom?" the judge asked. There was a pause too long to hide. "No one," he said finally. The judge nodded slowly. "So you acted under assumption." My lawyer leaned forward. Assumption that my client would not contest. Silence filled the room. Then the judge spoke words that changed everything. Temporary exclusive use of marital residence is denied. Financial restraining order remains in effect. Full forensic accounting ordered. My husband's face drained of color. He had expected sympathy. He had walked in believing age and confidence would protect him. He walked out knowing scrutiny was coming. Outside the courtroom, he tried to speak to me. "You didn't have to embarrass me," he said under his breath. I looked at him calmly. "You embarrassed yourself when you thought I wouldn't notice." She stood a few steps back, holding the child, watching us like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Our eyes met briefly. There was fear there now. Not of me, of him. That afternoon, my lawyer explained what forensic accounting meant. Every transfer, every withdrawal, every hidden account. Nothing would be overlooked. "He's been sloppy," she said. "Arrogant people usually are." The days that followed were a blur of disclosures and discoveries, accounts I had never seen, payments labeled as consulting fees that went nowhere, gifts disguised as expenses. He had been financing a second life, and doing it with marital funds. The child was not his biologically. That came out quietly through paperwork, not confession. He had claimed paternity to justify access, to justify urgency, to justify removing me. When my lawyer told me, I felt no triumph. Only a deep, tired sadness for how far he had gone to avoid honesty. He called me that night. His voice was different, lower, pleading. "She has nowhere to go," he said. "The child needs stability." "You should have thought of that before you dismantled our marriage," I replied. "You're being cruel." "No," I said, "I'm being accurate." I hung up and sat alone in my apartment, the city lights flickering outside the window. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future without managing him. The revenge was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was the slow exposure of truth to daylight, and daylight is unforgiving. The forensic accountant's report arrived in sections like a series of small detonations instead of one clean blast. My lawyer warned me not to read it alone. I ignored her and opened the first file at my kitchen table, coffee untouched hands steady in a way that surprised me. The numbers told a story my marriage never had. There were accounts opened in shell names I didn't recognize. Transfers timed around my birthdays and anniversaries dates he knew I would be distracted by dinner plans and forced smiles. Payments to a private landlord across town. Tuition checks to a preschool that wasn't ours. Jewelry purchased and returned, then purchased again somewhere else, like he was learning how to hide his tracks by trial and error. This wasn't a late-life crisis. This was a parallel life. The second section hit harder. It showed a loan taken out against our joint investment portfolio without my consent labeled as business restructuring. The money funneled straight into an account in his name only. The timing matched the month he started sleeping on the couch claiming his back hurt. I felt a familiar urge to explain it away, to soften it, to blame stress. I let the urge pass. That afternoon, my lawyer called. "He's retained new counsel," she said, "a firm known for aggressive settlement tactics." "Good," I replied. "That means he's scared." She laughed softly. "It means he wants to end this before the rest comes out." The rest. There was always more. The next court appearance was not about property. It was about conduct. The judge reviewed the report with an expression that grew increasingly tight. He asked my husband why he had misrepresented the child's paternity. My husband did not answer immediately. When he did, it was with a story about confusion, about emotional attachment, about doing what felt right. The judge did not respond to feelings, he responded to facts. "You use that claim to force your wife out of the marital residence," he said. "That is not confusion. That is strategy." I watched my husband's shoulders slump slightly. The man who once controlled every room he entered was losing his grip in plain sight. The judge ordered immediate reimbursement of misappropriated funds and issued a warning about further misrepresentation. The words were measured. The message was not. Outside the courtroom, the younger woman confronted him. "Not me. Him." I heard her voice rise. I heard the child start to cry. I saw her gesture sharply toward the exit. She walked away without him. I did not feel vindicated. I felt finished. That night my sister called again. This time her voice was different, cautious, curious. "I didn't know," she said. "About the money, about the lies." "You didn't want to," I replied. She was quiet. "Then what do you want?" The question startled me. I thought for a moment. I want what's mine, and I want the truth on record. For revenge. For closure, I said. She did not argue. The following weeks were relentless. Depositions, sworn statements, long days of waiting followed by moments of sharp clarity. Each session peeled back another layer of the man I thought I knew. He contradicted himself often. Dates shifted. Stories changed. He underestimated how carefully women document their lives. Every calendar entry I had saved, every receipt, every email I thought was mundane became evidence. One afternoon, as we waited outside a conference room, he leaned toward me. "You're enjoying this," he said quietly. I looked at him, really looked. The thinning hair, the lines around his mouth, the panic he couldn't hide anymore. "No," I said, "I'm reclaiming time." He scoffed. "You'll be alone." "I was alone in that marriage," I replied. "This is just honesty catching up." The settlement offer came 2 days later. Generous, urgent, loaded with conditions about confidentiality and mutual non-disparagement. My lawyer slid it across the table. "It's strong." I read it slowly, then I shook my head. "Remove the silence clause," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual." "So is being erased," I replied. "I won't be quiet for his comfort." She nodded. Then we counter. As I left her office, I realized the revenge I was enacting wasn't about punishing him. It was about refusing to disappear, and that for a man who built his second life on my absence was the one thing he could not survive. The counteroffer changed everything. My lawyer warned me it would. She explained how removing the confidentiality clause would expose him to social scrutiny, professional fallout, and questions he had spent years dodging. She asked me more than once if I was sure. I was. Within 48 hours, his attorney requested an emergency call. Not a meeting. A call. That told me more than any document could. He's concerned about reputational damage, his attorney said carefully. Given his age and standing, discretion would benefit all parties. I almost laughed. Discretion had benefited him for decades. It had cost me my voice, my safety, my sense of reality. "My client is open to settlement," my lawyer replied evenly, "but not at the expense of truth." Silence followed, then a sigh. "We'll need time," his attorney said. Time was something he no longer controlled. In the days that followed, I began receiving messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Former colleagues, neighbors, even one of his business partners. They asked neutral questions that weren't neutral at all. They were trying to place pieces. I answered only when asked directly. I did not embellish. I did not soften. I let facts speak. That was enough. One afternoon, I ran into the younger woman at a grocery store across town. I almost didn't recognize her. No makeup, hair pulled back, the confidence gone. The child sat in the cart swinging his legs. She froze when she saw me. I considered walking past, but something made me stop. "I didn't know," she said immediately. Too quickly. "He told me you were unstable, that you refused to move on." I studied her face. She looked tired, not guilty, just tired. "He told me you needed rescuing," I said calmly, "that I was in the way." Her eyes filled. I left. "I know," I replied. "He said the money would come through," she continued, "that everything was almost finalized." I nodded. "It never is with men like him." She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." I believed her, or at least I believed she believed herself. "Take care of the child," I said. "Don't let him teach you to disappear." She nodded, tears falling freely now. I walked away without bitterness. That chapter wasn't mine to write anymore. That night, my husband called from an unfamiliar number. His voice was unsteady. "You're ruining me," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm surviving you." "You want to tell everyone," he snapped. "You want to humiliate me." "I want the record corrected," I said. "You don't get to rewrite history because you're uncomfortable with the truth." He laughed bitterly. "At your age, what do you think you're going to do next?" That question stayed with me long after the call ended. What was I going to do next? For the first time in decades, the answer wasn't shaped around him. The next court session was decisive. The judge reviewed the revised settlement terms, the refusal of confidentiality, the documented misconduct. "This court does not reward deception," he said plainly, "nor does it enforce silence when harm has been demonstrated." The settlement was adjusted, assets divided fairly, penalties assessed, my legal fees covered in full. When it was over, truly over, I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was clenched. Outside the courthouse, my husband stood alone. No entourage, no hand on his back, no one waiting in the car. He looked at me, eyes searching. "You could have let this be quieter," he said. I met his gaze steady and unafraid. "You could have let me stay." I walked past him without another word. That evening, I sat in my apartment with the windows open, the city sounds drifting in. I poured myself a glass of wine and raised it to no one. Revenge had never been about destruction. It was about exposure. And the truth once exposed does not negotiate. It stands. The silence after the settlement was louder than any argument we had ever had. No calls, no messages, no frantic attempts to control the outcome, just absence. For years, absence had been his weapon. He withdrew affection, withheld information, disappeared emotionally whenever accountability came too close. Now absence belonged to me. I moved again, this time by choice. A small house near the edge of town close to a park and a public library. Nothing grand, nothing symbolic, just mine. I furnished it slowly, deliberately. Each chair chosen because I liked how it felt when I sat down. Each lamp because it made the room kinder at night. Ownership, I learned, isn't about deeds. It's about agency. One afternoon, a letter arrived from his former employer. Not an apology, not sympathy, just a notification that he had resigned effective immediately. Personal reasons cited. Reputation preserved on paper. Dismantled in reality. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I no longer needed to open. The ripple effects reached farther than I expected. His sister stopped calling. His friends avoided me in public, unsure which version of the story would hold. A few reached out quietly, cautiously admitting they had suspected something was wrong for years. I listened. I did not comfort them. This was not about easing anyone else's conscience. What surprised me most was my own reaction. I did not feel triumphant. I felt clear. Clear about what I had endured. Clear about what I would never accept again. The first holiday alone arrived quietly. No forced smiles. No carefully balanced seating. No pretending. I cooked for myself, lit a candle, and ate slowly at the kitchen table. It was the most peaceful holiday I could remember. That evening, I found myself thinking about the woman I used to be. The one who smoothed over tension. The one who made excuses. The one who believed endurance was the same as love. She had kept me alive. But she could not keep me whole. The call came unexpectedly late one afternoon. It was him. His voice sounded older, not weaker, just stripped of performance. "I didn't think it would end like this," he said. "It didn't have to," I replied. "I thought you'd forgive me." I let the silence stretch. "You mistook forgiveness for erasure," I said. "I forgive myself now. That's enough." He exhaled. "I have nothing left." I thought about correcting him, about listing the assets he still had, the choices he still possessed. Instead, I said, "You have consequences." He hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I slept deeply. In the weeks that followed, I began doing small things I had postponed for years. I joined a writing group, took a painting class, walked every morning without checking the time. I rediscovered my body not as something that aged, but as something that carried me forward. At a gathering one evening, a woman asked me how I found the courage to leave. I smiled gently. "I didn't leave," I said. "I was pushed." Courage came later. She nodded, understanding more than she said. The truth is, revenge didn't restore me. Self-recognition did. I had spent decades adjusting myself to fit someone else's comfort, shrinking, softening, compromising. And then in one brutal night, I was forced to stand on my own. What he never anticipated was that I would not beg to return. I would rebuild. And in rebuilding, I would become someone he could never replace. Because women like me do not need youth to begin again. We need permission. And sometimes the cruelest betrayal is also the moment that finally gives it to us. The rumor reached me before the request did. A friend from the writing group mentioned it casually, like weather. "I heard he's engaged," she said, eyes searching my face for impact. Engaged. I nodded, surprised by how little it landed. Not because it wasn't absurd. A man in his mid-60s proposing again, already rehearsing a future that looked suspiciously like a repeat. But because I had already grieved him while we were still married, there was nothing left to take. The request arrived a week later. Not from him, from his attorney. They wanted to revisit the settlement. Specifically, they wanted to amend the language regarding disclosure and public statements. They wanted quiet again, a softening, a smoothing over now that the next chapter of his life required a clean opening. I read the letter twice, then set it aside and went for a walk. The park was busy, children on scooters, older couples moving slowly, synchronized by years. I watched a woman about my age laughing with a friend on a bench and felt a pang of recognition. Not envy, kinship. When I returned home, I called my lawyer. "No," I said simply. She didn't argue. "Do you want to respond at all?" "Yes," I said briefly. The response was one sentence. "The agreement stands as written." That was it. 3 days later, he showed up at my door. No call, no warning, just the knock, hesitant like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there. I opened the door and saw him for what he was now. A man displaced from the story he thought he owned. "You look well," he said. "So do you," I replied. It was true. He looked lighter, nervous, like someone about to step onto a stage without knowing his lines. "I didn't expect you to move here," he said, glancing at the street. "I didn't expect you to bring strangers into our home," I replied evenly. "Life surprises us." He swallowed. "I need a favor." I waited. "They're asking questions," he continued, "about the money, about the timing, about you. And it would help if you clarified things. Clarified what? That we just grew apart. I smiled then, not unkindly, just firmly. That would be a lie. His jaw tightened. Do you really want to be remembered like this? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I want to be remembered accurately. He shook his head. You're bitter. No, I said, I'm finished. He stood there for a long moment, then nodded once like he was accepting terms he could not renegotiate. As he turned to leave, he stopped. You'll regret this. I watched him walk away before answering. I already lived through regret, I said. This is relief. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table and felt something unexpected. Sadness, yes, but also a strange gratitude. He had given me a final confirmation. He still believed the story could be controlled. He still believed my silence was something he was entitled to. That belief was the last thing I needed to let go. The engagement announcement appeared online a month later, carefully worded, smiling photos, comments filled with congratulations and polite distance. I scrolled once, then closed the page. I had my own announcement to make. Not public, not dramatic. I enrolled in a certification program I had postponed for years. I applied for a part-time consulting role with a nonprofit that helped older women navigate financial transitions after divorce. I started speaking quietly to women who recognized pieces of themselves in my experience, not to stir anger, to offer clarity. One evening after a session ran long, a woman stayed behind. She was trembling, eyes rimmed red. He says I'm nothing without him, she whispered. I took her hand. That's how men who benefit from your doubt keep you. She nodded slowly, something shifting. As I drove home, I realized the sharpest twist of all. The revenge was never the exposure, or the settlement, or the quiet collapse of his carefully curated image. The revenge was that I no longer needed him to witness my life. I was building something he could not touch, something he could not replace, and for the first time that felt like victory. The first time I spoke in front of a room full of women, my hands shook. Not because I was afraid of being judged, but because I was no longer hiding. The nonprofit asked me to share my experience at a small workshop on financial transitions after divorce. Nothing dramatic, just a circle of folding chairs, paper cups of coffee, women ranging from their early 50s to well into their 70s. Some had notebooks, some had clenched jaws. All of them had lived long enough to know silence has a cost. I did not rehearse. I told them about this night I was told to leave, about the money moved quietly, about the way trust can be used against you when it becomes habit instead of choice. I did not say his name. I did not need to. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then one woman spoke. He said I was too old to start over. Another added, he said no one else would want me. A third whispered, he said I should be grateful he stayed as long as he did. I listened, and I realized something that made my chest tighten. What happened to me was not unusual. It was just rarely confronted. After that night, invitations followed. Not many, not loud, but steady. Small groups, private conversations, coffee meetings where women leaned in and asked questions they had been taught not to ask. How do you check accounts without alerting him? How do you document without escalating? How do you leave without disappearing? I answered carefully. I did not give advice I wasn't qualified to give. I pointed them toward resources, toward lawyers, toward their own instincts, toward themselves. Meanwhile, my own life continued to widen. The consulting work turned into a contract. The writing group asked me to lead a session. My days filled with purpose that did not require permission or apology. One afternoon, my lawyer called with an update I hadn't been expecting. He's struggling to finalize his new arrangements, she said. I knew what she meant. The new life was expensive, the image costly. The silence he had relied on was no longer guaranteed. His income had shifted, his circle narrowed. And she added, there's a question about his will. That got my attention. He's revising it, she continued. And there's concern he's attempting to exclude you retroactively from certain considerations already settled. I exhaled slowly. Can he? No, she replied. But he can try. I felt a familiar steadiness settle in. Not anger, readiness. Handle it, I said. I am. That evening I sat on my porch watching the sky change color. I thought about legacy, about how men like him equate it with control, with naming rights, with who gets what after they're gone. I thought about how wrong that is. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It is what you awaken in others. A week later, I received a message from his sister. Short, awkward, almost apologetic. He's not doing well. He keeps saying you ruined him. I stared at the screen for a long moment before responding. I didn't ruin him. I stopped covering for him. She didn't reply. That night, I slept deeply dreamless and full. In the morning, I woke with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. Not anxiety, not obligation. Expectation. There was more ahead, not conflict, not cleanup, creation. I poured my coffee and sat at the table, sunlight warming the room, and understood something quietly powerful. The chapter where I was reacting was over. Everything from here on out was intentional. And the man who thought he could replace me had no place in what I was becoming. Not as a villain, not as a regret, not even as a memory I needed to revisit. He had served his final purpose. By leaving, he had finally forced me to arrive. The call came late, just after 10 in the evening, when the house was quiet and my thoughts had finally slowed enough to feel like my own again. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. "This is the hospital," a woman said gently. "You're listed as an emergency contact." For a moment, I couldn't place him in my life anymore. Not emotionally, not practically. It felt like hearing about someone I used to know. "What happened?" I asked. "He collapsed at home," she said. "Heart-related. He's stable now, but the doctors would like to speak with family." Family. I drove to the hospital out of habit more than obligation. The corridors smelled the same as they always do, sterile and unforgiving, lit in a way that makes everyone look smaller than they are. He was lying in the bed when I entered, thinner than I remembered, tubes at his side, color drained from his face. For the first time since the night he told me to leave, I saw fear in him that wasn't masked by control. "You came," he said hoarsely. "I was nearby," I replied. We sat in silence. Machines filled the gaps neither of us wanted to touch. "They told me I was lucky," he said finally, "that it could have been worse." I nodded. "Luck runs out." He closed his eyes briefly. "I didn't think you'd still matter." There it was, the truest thing he had ever said to me. "I always mattered," I replied. "You just benefited from pretending I didn't." His hand twitched, reaching slightly, then stopping. "I made mistakes." "You made choices," I corrected. "Mistakes are accidents." He turned his head toward me, eyes glassy. "I'm alone." I considered that, not with cruelty, with honesty. "You surrounded yourself with people who didn't challenge you," I said. "That's not the same as being loved." Tears slipped down his temples, disappearing into the pillow. "I don't want to die like this." I stood slowly, then lived differently, but not at my expense. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, he had no argument prepared. As I left the room, I felt something release inside me. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, completion. In the weeks that followed, his condition improved. Mine did too. The nonprofit asked me to help design a program specifically for women over 50 navigating betrayal later in life, not just divorce, identity collapse, financial shock, emotional erasure. We called it Reclaim. Women came in guarded and left standing taller, not because I fixed them, but because they saw themselves reflected without judgment. One afternoon after a session ended, I stayed behind gathering papers. A woman my age lingered near the door. "How did you stop wanting him to suffer?" she asked quietly. I smiled gently. "I didn't stop wanting it. I stopped needing it." She nodded slowly, like something had unlocked. That night, I wrote for hours. Not about him, about myself. About the version of me that stayed too long because she thought endurance was love. About the version of me now who understood that dignity is not something you negotiate for. It's something you claim. A letter arrived a few days later, handwritten, shaky. He was revising his will again. He wanted me to know. He wanted my blessing. I did not respond. Some closures do not require witnesses. As autumn settled in, I walked through the park near my home, leaves crunching beneath my feet, air sharp and clean. I felt rooted in a way I never had before. I was no longer defined by what had been done to me. I was defined by what I refused to become. And what I chose instead. The last time I heard his name, it was spoken softly by someone else. A mutual acquaintance mentioned it in passing over coffee, like an update about a distant storm that had already moved on. He was living alone now. The engagement had ended quietly. Health issues lingered, nothing dramatic, just consequences unfolding at their own pace. I listened without reaction. That surprised me more than anything, because there was a time when every detail of his life felt tied to my own, when his choices dictated my sleep, my appetite, my sense of worth. Now his name floated past me like background noise, recognizable, irrelevant. That was how I knew I was free. My days had taken on a rhythm that belonged only to me. Mornings began with walks and coffee I drank slowly without rushing to accommodate anyone else's schedule. Afternoons were filled with work that mattered, conversations that didn't require me to shrink, and moments of quiet I no longer feared. The Reclaim program had grown beyond anything I expected. Women shared stories they had never said out loud, about being replaced, about being dismissed, about being told they were too old, too tired, too late. I never told them what to do. I told them what I learned. That betrayal is not a reflection of your value. that silence protects the wrong people, that starting over after 50 is not failure, it is correction. One evening after a long session, I came home and sat on my porch as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in colors that felt earned. I thought about the woman I had been the night I stood on the sidewalk with a suitcase and no plan. She thought she had lost everything. What she had actually lost was an illusion. The illusion that loyalty would be returned, that patience would be rewarded, that love meant enduring whatever someone else decided you deserved. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old photos I hadn't looked at in years. Holidays where I was present but invisible, smiles that felt practiced, a life that looked stable from the outside and hollow from within. I did not feel regret. I felt gratitude. Because if he had not pushed me out so cruelly, I might have stayed. I might have continued managing, explaining, adjusting. I might have grown smaller until there was nothing left to recognize. Instead, I was forced to choose myself, not dramatically, not heroically, decisively. The final legal document arrived a week later. Confirmation that everything was settled, no loose ends, no obligations remaining. I signed it, placed it in a drawer, and closed it without ceremony. Some chapters do not need closure scenes. They just end. That night, I slept deeply, the kind of sleep that comes when your nervous system finally believes the danger has passed, when you are no longer bracing, when your body understands that the fight is over. In the morning, I woke with a sense of quiet purpose. There was still life ahead of me, still joy to uncover, still connections to build, not because I was proving anything, because I wanted to. If you are hearing this, and something in you is stirring, listen to it. If you are being told to disappear quietly to accept less, to make yourself convenient for someone else's comfort, hear me clearly. You do not need permission to exist fully. You do not need to be chosen again by someone who already showed you who they are. And you do not need revenge to reclaim your power. Sometimes the strongest response is refusing to carry someone else's shame any longer. I am not bitter. I am not angry. I am awake. And if this story resonated with you, if it mirrored something you have lived or feared or survived, stay connected. Share your thoughts. Leave a comment. Subscribe for more stories like this, told honestly without shortcuts. Because it is never too late to choose yourself. And the life waiting on the other side of that choice is worth everything it takes to get there.